On a permanent campsite, nestled among the quiet, unassuming German town of Lurked, a caravan stood for 2 decades. It was a familiar sight, often surrounded by children. Parents would wave as their sons and daughters skipped towards it, believing they were heading for a friendly afternoon with a trusted figure. The caravan, however, was not a place of innocent games. It was a carefully constructed façade, a place where the ordinary masked something truly monstrous, hidden in plain sight, year after year, until the sheer weight of its secret could no longer be contained. The truth, when it finally emerged, would dismantle the very foundations of trust. Lurked is a small, picturesque town in North Rhine-Westphalia, Germany, the kind of place where community ties run deep and neighbors know each other by name. For many families, life revolved around simple pleasures, school, local events, and the shared spaces that fostered a sense of belonging. The permanent campsite on the outskirts of town was one such hub. It wasn't just a place for weekend getaways, it was home to a handful of residents who lived there year-round, blending into the fabric of the wider community. Among them was Andreas V, a man who had made his caravan a permanent fixture, seemingly a friendly, unassuming presence. He became known to families, a casual acquaintance, someone who was simply part of the landscape of their lives. Over time, Andreas V's caravan became a destination for children. Some were brought by parents who saw him as harmless, a trusted adult who perhaps offered a distraction or a place to play. Others were delivered by adults who knew precisely what horrors awaited them behind the caravan's closed door. The timeline of this unfolding tragedy stretched back almost 2 decades, to 1998, and continued relentlessly until 2018. It was a chilling testament to how easily a predator can operate when cloaked in the ordinary, when perceived as just part of the furniture. What began as seemingly innocent visits, perhaps a small treat or a moment of attention, slowly morphed into something far darker, a pattern of abuse that drew in victim after victim, right under the noses of a trusting community. Perhaps one of the most agonizing aspects of this case is how Andreas V managed to not only continue his heinous acts but, at one point, was even entrusted with the care of a child by the very system designed to protect them. A foster child, a girl of around 4 or 5 years old, was assigned to him after an official check by the Youth Welfare Center. She lived with him for approximately 2 years, becoming one of his main victims during that time. How could such a catastrophic oversight occur? The checks, the interviews, the bureaucratic safeguards, all seemingly failed to detect the monster lurking beneath the surface. It begs the question, what exactly were they looking for, and what did they choose to ignore? The failures were not confined to initial assessments. Before Andreas V's eventual arrest in late 2018, the Youth Services Department received a formal complaint specifically naming him. This wasn't a vague whisper or an unsubstantiated rumor. It was a formal complaint, submitted through official channels, carrying the weight of a direct accusation. Yet, it was not acted upon immediately. The complaint, a potential lifeline for so many children, seemed to enter the system and simply cease to move. It gathered dust, perhaps, or was shunted into an administrative black hole, while the abuse continued unchecked. This single, critical detail illuminates a systemic breakdown that allowed a known danger to persist. Finally, in late 2018, the grim reality of Andreas V's crimes began to surface. The catalyst for his arrest is not widely detailed in public records, but what is clear is that once the investigation truly began, the facade crumbled quickly. When investigators searched his caravan and property, they unearthed a trove of horrifying evidence. Hundreds of files, containing images and videos of abuse, were recovered. Some of this material had been recorded by Andreas V himself, a chilling testament to his depravity. This wasn't evidence that was meticulously hidden, much of it, it would later be suggested, was not truly concealed at all, merely overlooked or ignored for far too long. The sheer volume of material pointed to an operation of staggering scale and duration. This was not an isolated incident, but a deeply embedded network of abuse that had been flourishing for 2 decades. The investigation continued to unearth disturbing revelations. The official count of confirmed victims reached a staggering 285. 285 individual lives, irrevocably scarred. The youngest victim was a mere 3 years old. The breadth of the abuse, the sheer number of children involved, sent shockwaves far beyond Lugda. It wasn't just Andreas V operating in isolation. Two accomplices, Mario S. and Heiko V., were also implicated and later convicted, revealing a network of individuals who facilitated or directly participated in the abuse. This wasn't merely the act of one monster, it was a horrifying conspiracy, enabled by complicity and, perhaps even more disturbingly, by indifference. The public outcry was immense. How could this happen? How could so many children be abused for so long, under the gaze of a community and the supposed protection of official institutions? The questions weren't just about the perpetrators, they were about the systems that had failed. The case prompted a parliamentary inquiry in North Rhine-Westphalia, aiming to dissect the profound failures of youth welfare services. This wasn't about finding a single scapegoat, it was about understanding the mechanisms that allowed such a catastrophe to unfold, and to prevent it from ever happening again. The inquiry would become a painstaking, often painful, process of examining every missed warning sign, every bureaucratic misstep, every moment when intervention could have changed the course of hundreds of lives. The parliamentary inquiry delivered its damning verdict, it confirmed systemic failures at multiple levels. This was not the isolated error of one individual, but a cascade of institutional breakdowns. From the initial checks that somehow deemed Andreas V fit to foster a child, to the unaddressed formal complaint, to the general lack of oversight and communication between various agencies, the system was riddled with gaps. The report painted a grim picture of a bureaucracy that, through incompetence, indifference, or sheer overload, became an unwitting accomplice to suffering. It revealed how, even with direct warnings, the machinery designed to protect children could grind to a halt, leaving the most vulnerable exposed. The findings were a brutal indictment, revealing a truth far more disturbing than a simple oversight. In 2020, Andreas V faced justice. He was convicted and received the maximum sentence allowable under German law, 13 years. For many, this sentence, despite being the legal maximum, felt inadequate given the 2 decades of unspeakable abuse and the immense number of victims. However, the verdict included a crucial provision: unlimited security custody. This means that while his initial prison term is set, he will likely never be released. He is deemed such a persistent danger that, upon completion of his sentence, he will be held indefinitely in a secure facility. This aspect of the judgment offered a measure of reassurance that Andreas V would not again walk free among communities, a small but significant victory for the victims and their families. The convictions of Andreas V and his accomplices, Mario S. and Heiko V, marked the end of a long, dark chapter, but the repercussions continued to ripple through Lugda and across Germany. The names of the victims, and the full extent of their trauma, may never be publicly known, but their collective suffering stands as a stark reminder of what happens when trust is weaponized and institutions fail. The parliamentary inquiry's findings, confirming systemic failures, initiated a painful but necessary process of introspection and reform within Germany's youth welfare services. The goal was clear: to reinforce the safeguards, to ensure that no formal complaint ever again falls into a black hole, and that the protection of children becomes an absolute, unyielding priority, not just a procedural checkbox. The Lugda case left an indelible scar, a haunting question mark over the very concept of community safety. How could a formal complaint, submitted through official channels, about a known individual, simply vanish into the bureaucratic ether? It forces us to confront a chilling truth: the most dangerous threats are not always hidden in the shadows, sometimes they are in plain sight, normalized by familiarity and overlooked by overburdened or complacent systems. The legacy of Andreas V is not just the suffering of hundreds of children, but the stark, undeniable proof that vigilance must extend beyond the obvious, into the very structures we trust to keep us safe. The lessons learned from Lugda are not confined to Germany, they are a universal call to examine the blind spots in our own communities, to question the unquestionable, and to never allow a complaint to simply stop moving. The cost of such inaction is simply too high. For 2 decades, from 1998 to 2018, the small town of Lugda harbored a dark secret, not in some forgotten corner, but at its very periphery, an open secret for some, an unimaginable horror for others. The children who suffered at the hands of Andreas V and his accomplices carried their burdens in silence, often too young to articulate what was happening, or too afraid to speak out. The youngest, just 3 years old, had her innocence stolen before she could even fully grasp its meaning. The sheer duration of the abuse, enabled by a combination of predatory manipulation, active complicity, and profound systemic failures, speaks volumes about the fragility of child protection when basic checks and balances are ignored. This case isn't just a grim statistic of 285 victims, it is a profound testament to the power of a hidden crime to fester and grow, unseen and unaddressed, until its sheer magnitude finally forces it into the light. The lurked case serves as a harrowing lesson, not just about the existence of evil, but about the critical importance of a robust, responsive, and accountable social welfare system. It highlighted the devastating consequences when complaints are filed but not acted upon, when initial assessments are superficial, and when vigilance gives way to complacency. The journey from initial trust to the final, horrifying tally of 285 victims is a stark reminder that child protection is a continuous, collective responsibility. It demands constant scrutiny, relentless advocacy, and an unwavering commitment to listening to the quietest voices, even when those voices are too young or too traumatized to be heard clearly. The shadow cast by Andreas V's caravan may have lifted, but its lessons must echo, a perpetual warning against the dangers of turning a blind eye.